What if a legend allowed itself to be captured? What if its greatest weapon was not a flying mortar, but a whispered secret? And what if the person tasked with guarding it was the one who needed to be set free? The cold was a living thing. It seeped from the granite stones, coating Anya Petrova's iron breastplate in a fine sheen of frost and biting deep into her bones. Down here, in the deepest oubliette of the Kremlin, the air was thick and stale, tasting of wet rock, old rust, and something else, something faintly sweet, like forgotten herbs left to rot. This was her first solo watch. Her knuckles, clenched right around the shaft of her halberd, ached with a tension that had nothing to do with the weight of the weapon. Before her, behind bars forged of star iron and etched with grim-faced saints, sat the source of that strange, sweet decay. Yaga. The legend spoke of a crone with iron teeth and a shrieking voice, who rode the skies in a mortar and lived in a hut that danced on chicken legs. The monster who stole disobedient children and ground the bones of Tsar soldiers into her bread. The woman in the cell was none of those things. She was small, shrouded in a coarse, gray shift. Her hair, a wild tangle of silver and white, fell around a face so lined it seemed like a map of all her 8 centuries. She wasn't huddled in a corner or rattling her chains. She simply sat on the bare stone floor, her back straight, her wrists resting calmly on her knees, where heavy manacles bound them. Her eyes were closed. Anya jumped as the heavy door behind her groaned open. Captain Dmitry Orlov's bulky frame filled the doorway, his presence shattering the crypt-like silence. He smelled of cheap vodka and arrogance. "See, little Petrova?" he sneered, his voice echoing off the damp walls. Not so fearsome now as she, just a dried-up old stick. He strode to the bars, rapping his knuckles sharply against the iron. "Hey, witch, still breathing in there?" Yaga did not move. Not a twitch, not a flutter of an eyelid. Dmitri spat on the floor near the cell. "Nothing. She's been like this for days. Don't let her stillness fool you. It's a trick. Commander Volkov says her kind can whisper curses into your dreams." He turned to Anya, his gaze lingering on her face a moment too long. "Your only duty is to watch. Don't speak to it. Don't listen if it speaks. If it moves, you scream for me. Understood?" Anya gave a sharp, single nod, her throat too tight for words. "Good girl," Dmitri said with a condescending smirk before turning and stomping out, the door slamming shut with a finality that felt like a tomb ceiling. Silence rushed back in, deeper and heavier than before. Anya exhaled slowly, the sound unnaturally loud. She focused on her training, on the solid, predictable reality of her duty. Observe and report. The prisoner is secure. The cell is intact. But her eyes kept being drawn back to the old woman. This was the creature who had haunted the forests for generations. This was the terror that had required the Tsar's finest hunters, the sacrifice of a dozen men, and the burning of her legendary hut to finally subdue. She looked fragile, and yet her stillness was not one of defeat. It was the calm of a deep, still lake, and Anya had the unnerving feeling that unimaginable things lurked in its depths. Hours bled together, marked only by the slow drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the growing numbness in Anya's feet. She watched the prisoner, and the prisoner, in her profound silence, seemed to watch her back without ever opening her eyes. Anya found herself studying the lines on that ancient face, the graceful curve of a spine that refused to bow, the hands that looked more like gnarled roots than human flesh. It was then that she noticed it. A single, tenacious weed, pale and spindly, pushing up through a crack in the stone floor inside Yaga's cell. It was impossible. No light, no soil, just bitter cold and stone. Yet there it was, tiny, defiant stab of life in a place built for death. As if sensing her observation, Yaga's eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the color of a winter sky just before a storm, ancient and impossibly clear. There was no malice in them, no plea, no madness, only a vast, unnerving knowing. Her gaze locked with Anya's, holding her as effectively as any iron chain. The old woman's lips, chapped and pale, did not so much as twitch, yet voice, dry as fallen leaves and soft as grinding stone, filled the space inside Anya's own skull. "Your bones are singing, little bird," the voice whispered. A sound felt more than heard. "Is a tune I have not heard in a long, long age." Then Yaga's eyes closed again, and the connection severed. The only sound was the frantic hammering of Anya's own heart, a deafening drum in the crushing silence. The watch had only just begun. The voice stayed with her, long after her watch ended and she stumbled from the oppressive silence of the dungeon into the gray, pre-dawn light of the barracks yard. The words echoed in her mind. "Your bones are singing." They were nonsense, witch's trick, a fragment of delirium born of exhaustion and fear. Captain Dmitri would have said as much, with a cruel laugh and a warning about listening to demons. But as Anya scrubbed the dungeon's chill from her skin with rough soap and colder water, the phrase wouldn't leave. It felt less like an insult or a threat, and more like a statement, an observation. Sleep, when it finally came, was no escape. She was not Anya in her dreams. She was a presence, soaring over a vast, dark canopy of pine trees in a vessel of polished wood, the wind a roaring symphony in her ears. Below, a hut perched on gigantic, scaly chicken legs twisted and paced, a restless, living silhouette against a moonlit clearing. The scent was not of rotten iron, but of damp earth, pine resin, and the intoxicating perfume of night-blooming flowers. She felt a power thrumming through her, ancient and wild, a current that connected her to every root, every stone, every sleeping creature in the forest. She woke with a gasp, the coarse wool of her blanket scratching her cheek, the familiar smells of the barracks, stale hay, leather, and sweat, assailing her senses. The memory of the dream was already fading, but the feeling of it, the raw, unbounded freedom, lingered like a phantom limb. Shaken, she dressed for her next watch, the routine movements feeling alien. As she buckled her breastplate, her fingers brushed against the cold iron. A strange, staticky sensation prickled up her fingertips, so faint she almost dismissed it. But then, as she reached for the door handle, a wave of dizziness washed over her, accompanied by a fleeting, overwhelming taste of blood and copper in her mouth. It was gone as quickly as it came. "You are exhausted, Anya," she told herself firmly. That is all. The walk back to the dungeon felt longer, the corridors more winding. The usual torchlight seemed to flicker with a different rhythm, the shadows dancing at the edge of her vision in ways she'd never noticed. She passed the blind scullery maid, Ludmilla, who was feeling her way along the stone wall with a gnarled hand. As Anya drew level with her, the old woman stopped. Her milky, unseeing eyes seemed to look right through her. "The stone is scared," Ludmilla mumbled, her voice a dry rustle. She tapped the wall with a crooked finger. "It hums a new song. Be careful, child. You are the one listening." Before Anya could form a response, the old woman shuffled away, leaving her frozen in the corridor, a fresh chill spreading through her veins that had nothing to do with the dungeon's cold. Her second watch was a study in tension. Yaga sat as still as before, a statue of resignation. But Anya could no longer see her as just an old woman. She was a focal point, a dark star whose gravity was warping the very fabric of reality around her. Anya watched the single, pale weed in the cell. Had it grown? Had it unfurled another tiny, defiant leaf? She focused on the torch in its sconce beside her, using its steady, predictable flame as an anchor. But as she stared, the flame seemed to lean slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward the cell bars, as if drawn by a silent wind. Anya blinked, and it was straight again, a trick of the eyes. It had to be. Her relief, a young, superstitious guard named Fyodor, arrived with a palpable air of dread. He blessed himself twice before even looking at the cell. "Anything," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Nothing," Anya replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Quiet." Fyodor nodded nervously, his gaze fixed on the motionless form of Yaga. "They say her magic is seeping out, that it's in the stones now." Ivan the Silent swears he saw a shadow move on its own down the west corridor. "Shadows do that," Anya said, more sharply than she intended. She needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with fear and ancient power. As she walked away, the words echoed in her mind, a chaotic chorus. Your bones are singing. The stone is scared. You are the one listening. She reached her small, Spartan chamber and closed the door, leaning against it as if to shut the whispers out. On her narrow cot, a folded piece of parchment lay. It was a letter, old and softened at the creases, from her grandmother Sasha. She'd been rereading it recently, seeking comfort in the familiar, looping script. Her eyes fell on a passage she had read a dozen times before, but now the words seemed to burn on the page. The old stories say the land has a heart, Anya, and that heart beats in the deep woods. They say that if it is ever caged in iron, the world will hold its breath, and the silence that follows will be more terrible than any storm. Anya's blood ran cold. She looked down at her own hands, the faint, static tingle that still lingered on her skin. She was not just guarding a prisoner. She was guarding a cage, and she was beginning to fear that the thing inside it was not the true monster. The true monster was the iron itself, and the fear that had forged it. The legend of Yaga was not over. It was simply waiting for a new verse to be written, and against her will, with every beat of her singing bones, Anya was being pulled into the song. The silence of the deep oubliette was no longer empty. It was a canvas, and upon it, Yaga's influence painted in subtle, terrifying strokes. The change did not announce itself with thunder or shaking walls. It arrived in whispers and scratches, and in the sudden, knowing gleam in a forgotten man's eyes. Far below Yaga's cell, in a darkness so complete it felt solid, Kalen stirred. For years, or was it decades? He had been a hollow thing, a shell of a man huddled in his own waste, his mind eroded by solitude and despair. The guards tossed scraps of food down the chute. He was a living corpse, a secret that Tsar's dungeons kept buried. But something had changed. A week ago, a new sound had begun to vibrate through the stone floor, a hum so low it was felt rather than heard. It was a frequency that resonated with the shattered pieces of his soul. Tonight, that hum became a command. His eyes, dry and crusted from disuse, snapped open. They did not adjust to the darkness, for there was nothing to see. Instead, they began to glow with a faint, sickly green light, illuminating the horror of his own emaciated fingers. A power not his own flooded his veins, cold and ancient. It was not a gentle touch. It was an invasion, possession. A raw, guttural sound tore from his throat, the first he had made in years. He scrambled on all fours to the damp wall of his pit. With a fingernail blackened and broken, he began to scratch. Not random marks. Intricate, interlocking symbols of a language forgotten by men. A language of roots and ruin. Each line he carved pulsed with that same faint green light, searing the image into the stone. The air in the pit began to thicken, smelling now of ozone and wet soil. Above, in the vast, warm chaos of the palace kitchens, another transformation was underway. Mishka, the hulking cook whose simple nature was a source of mockery and affection, was kneading a mountain of dough. He always talked to the kitchen's unseen inhabitants, the fat, sleek rats that watched from the shadows with glittering eyes. "Long night, little brothers," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "The big house is restless." Usually, the rats would just twitch their noses, but tonight, one, larger and bolder than the rest, scurried right up to his table and sat on its haunches, looking at him. Mishka froze, his dough-covered hands hovering in the air. The rat's nose quivered. Then a series of images, sharp and clear, flashed into Mishka's mind. Captain Dmitri, his face flushed with drink, stumbling through the eastern corridor. The key to the spice cellar, which doubled as a secret armory, dangling from his belt. A map of the guard patrol routes, unrolled on a table in the barracks, with a fresh wine stain over the west wing. Mishka gasped, staggering back. The images vanished. The rat gave a final, chittering squeak and disappeared into a hole in the wall. He stood there, trembling, his simple heart pounding. He had always felt their thoughts, their simple hungers and fears. But this was different. This was information. This was a gift. Or a command. He didn't understand how or why, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was connected to the old one in the dark, the one the stones were whispering about. On her third watch, Anya felt the dungeon's new awareness like a physical pressure. The air was heavier, the silence more profound, and yet more articulate. Yaga remained in her meditative state, but the single weed in her cell had now unmistakably grown, sporting 3 small, heart-shaped leaves. Captain Dmitri made his rounds, his boots echoing with a bravado that felt brittle. "See?" he grunted, glaring at the silent crone. "Nothing. All that talk of seeping magic. Superstition. She's broken." As if in answer, a low, rhythmic scraping sound echoed up from the grates in the floor, the air shafts that connected to the lower oubliettes. Dmitri stiffened. "What is that?" "It's probably just Kalen," Anya said, forcing her voice to remain neutral. "The prisoner in the pit. He scrapes at the wall sometimes." The sound was different, though. It was purposeful, rhythmic, almost like a chant. Dmitri's face tightened. The madman. He'll be joining his witch soon enough. He shot a final, suspicious glance at Yaga and left, his unease a palpable trail behind him. Anya was alone again with the scraping, with the silent witch, and with the thrumming energy in the stones. She looked at Yaga, truly looked at her. The resignation she had first seen was a mask. This was not an end. It was an incubation. The legendary hut was burned, the mortar destroyed, but Yaga was redistributing her essence. She was not trying to escape her prison. She was infecting it. The legend of Yaga was wrong. She was not a creature of the forest. She was the forest itself. And a forest, when threatened, does not flee. It sends out new roots. It sprouts in the most unexpected, inhospitable places. It finds new soil. And in the darkness, new seeds were beginning to germinate. The unease that began as a whisper in the stones was now a palpable tremor running through the palace guard. Commander Gregor Volkov stood before Tsar Vasily in the opulent throne room, the gilded icons and rich tapestries feeling like a fragile veneer over a spreading rot. "The scratching from the oubliettes continues, Your Majesty," Volkov reported, his voice tight. "It's organized. My men report strange sounds, misplaced items. Fyodor claims his shadow moved independently. The men are on edge." Tsar Vasily, the iron-handed, stroked his beard, his fingers tracing the heavy jeweled rings he always wore. His paranoia, usually a simmering pot, was now at a rolling boil. "It is her influence, Volkov. A final, desperate gambit. She seeks to unman us with phantoms before the axe falls." He turned to the gaunt, severe man standing to his right. "Sylvanus, your assessment." High Priest Sylvanus stepped forward, his black robes swallowing the light from the fireplace. "The texts are clear, Your Majesty. A creature of such ancient, earthbound malice does not die easily. Its corruption seeps like a poison. It feeds on doubt and fear. The very stones of this palace, consecrated to God, are being defiled by its presence." He held up a vial of holy water. "The execution cannot come soon enough. We must purify the land with her blood." "See it done," the Tsar commanded, his eyes glinting with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. "Double the guard on the witch. No one enters or leaves that wing without your direct authorization, Volkov, and bring forward the execution. Dawn tomorrow." The command was a stone dropped into the stagnant waters of the palace, sending ripples of frantic activity in all directions. Pavel, the ambitious guard, saw not a crisis, but an opportunity. While others jumped at shadows, he saw a chance to prove his worth, to extract a valuable secret from the source of all this trouble. He waited until the changing of the guard, when the corridors were at their busiest, and slipped into the dungeon wing, avoiding Volkov's notice. He found Anya at her post, her posture rigid. "I'll take over early, Petrova," he announced, his tone dismissive. "Commander's orders. Something about tightening the roster before the big day." Anya hesitated, a knot of suspicion tightening in her stomach. But an order was an order. With a final, uneasy glance at Yaga's still form, she yielded her post. The moment the heavy door closed behind her, Pavel turned to the cell. He unclipped a heavy iron rod from his belt, the tool used for testing the integrity of the bars. He struck the star iron with a sharp, clanging blow. "Wake up, witch," he snarled. "All pretense of professionalism gone. Your time is almost up. But maybe we can make a deal. Tell me where you hid your treasures. The real ones. Not the baubles we burned. The knowledge. The secrets of long life. Whisper them to me, and I'll make your last night more comfortable." Inside the cell, Yaga did not open her eyes, but a subtle shift occurred in the air. The shadows in the far corner of the cell, already deep, seemed to congeal, to thicken into something solid. Pavel leaned closer, squinting, and he saw it. It was not a monster, not a beast. It was a reflection. It was him, but not as he was. It was a version of himself aged into a pathetic, mewling wreck, chained to a throne of skulls, his eyes hollow with the centuries-long hunger that could never be sated. It was his ambition, given form and shown its ultimate, desolate end. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. He stumbled back from the bars, the iron rod clattering to the floor. The vision vanished, but the psychic imprint of that bottomless despair clung to him like a shroud. His face was ashen, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He turned and fled the dungeon, not stopping until he was back in the blinding normality of the sunlit courtyard, where he vomited violently against a wall. When Anya returned later on a pretext of having forgotten a whetstone, she found the dungeon in an even deeper silence. Pavel was gone. The iron rod lay abandoned on the floor, and Yaga sat as serene as ever. But the air hummed with a new, cold satisfaction. The witch had not moved a muscle, yet she had effortlessly broken an ambitious man without uttering a single word. The web was tightening. The Tsar responded with iron and holy water. Yaga responded by holding up a mirror, and in the reflection, the Empire was beginning to see the rot at its own core. The execution was now hours away, and the palace held its breath, waiting for the storm they had foolishly caged to finally break loose. The Tsar's decree of a dawn execution fell upon the dungeon like a final, heavy stone. The air grew thick with a grim inevitability. Guards moved with a stiff, nervous energy, their eyes darting, their hands never far from their weapons. The scent of fear was now a sharp, metallic tang that overpowered even the smell of damp stone and rot. Anya felt it as a physical weight on her chest. Each breath was a struggle. The strange sensations had not abated. If anything, they had intensified. The torch flames now consistently bent toward Yaga's cell, dancing to a silent, unfelt breeze. The taste of blood in her mouth had become a constant, coppery companion. And the dreams of flight and primal power were so vivid she would wake with the scent of pine clinging to her skin. During a brief, solitary moment on watch, the silence was broken not by a voice in her mind, but by Yaga's actual physical voice. It was a dry rustle, like leaves scattering over stone, yet it carried an immense, weary authority. They believed my power was in the mortar, the hut. Yaga's eyes remained closed, but her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant song. They are children, breaking a toy and believing they have slain the beast inside. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a direct violation of orders. She should call for Captain Dmitri, but her feet were rooted to the spot, her voice trapped in her throat. The hut was a vessel, the mortar a tool. Yaga continued, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. My true power is the land, the deep, slow breath of the earth, the memory in the stone, the song in the sap. They could not burn that. They could only anger it. Her eyes opened then, and the storm-gray depths fixed on Anya. By bringing me here, to the heart of his stone and iron kingdom, your Tsar did not capture a witch. He planted a seed of the deep forest in his own throne room, and now it germinates. Anya found her voice, a trembling whisper. What do you want from me? A choice, little bird with singing bones, Yaga said, her gaze piercing. You are a crack in their wall. You listen. You feel the hum in the stone. You are a potential vessel. The power is leaving me, not because I am dying, but because I am preparing to move. It needs a new home before the shell is discarded. She gestured faintly with her manacled hands, a motion that seemed to encompass the entire dungeon, the palace, the world above. One path, you do nothing. At dawn, they will strike off my head, and the untamed, leaderless power I release will not simply vanish. It will lash out. It will rot the foundations, twist the minds of men, turn this proud palace into a tomb of screaming madness. It will be an unmaking. She leaned forward, the chains clinking softly. The other path, you open yourself. You become the new vessel. You do not become me. You become yourself, but awakened. You carry the heart of the forest out of this iron cage. You can channel the storm, rather than letting it rage uncontrolled. You can restore balance. The choice was a chasm opening at Anya's feet. Duty and the world she knew on one side. A terrifying, unimaginable power and a future she could not fathom on the other. Stumbling back to her quarters, her mind reeling, she fell to her knees by her cot and pulled out her grandmother's letter, the parchment soft and worn. Her eyes, blurred with tears, found the final lines, the ones she had never fully understood until this moment. Do not fear the old songs, my dear Anya, Sasha had written, for the forest is not our enemy. It is our forgotten mother, and a mother's heart, when caged, does not break. It finds a new home in the most tender and brave of its children. A terrifying clarity washed over her. Her grandmother hadn't been writing folk tales. She had been writing a warning, an inheritance, the vessel or the void, the keeper of the song, or the witness to the scream. Dawn was coming, and with it, Anya's decision would shape the fate of an empire. The pressure in the dungeon became a taut wire, humming with a psychic frequency that frayed nerves and twisted perceptions. The execution was no longer a distant decree. It was a blade already hanging in the air, and its shadow drove men to madness. Fyodor, the superstitious guard, had been unraveling for days. The whispers in the walls, the dancing shadows, the unnatural chill that clung to Yaga's cell, they were no longer just omens. They were a chorus screaming in his ears. His salvation, he decided, lay in ferreting out the corruption he was sure had already taken root among them. His wild eyes landed on the most likely suspect, Ivan the Silent. The man never spoke. He just watched, his ancient, knowing eyes seeing too much. What secrets did he trade with the witch in the silence? What curses had she woven into his quiet soul? It happened during the guard change in the central hall. Fyodor, his hand trembling on the hilt of his dagger, cornered Ivan. "You," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You're one of her creatures. I see it now. You whisper to the stones for her." Ivan merely regarded him with a weary, profound sadness. He shook his head slowly, a gesture not of denial, but of pity. That pity was the final spark. With a strangled cry, Fyodor drew his blade and lunged. The chaos was instantaneous. Shouts echoed. Guards who had been comrades moments before were now a tangle of confusion and fear. Ivan, old but far from feeble, deflected the first wild thrust, but Fyodor was a whirlwind of superstitious terror. A second lunge, meant for Ivan, caught a younger guard, Stefan, in the throat as he tried to intervene. A grotesque fountain of blood arced across the stone floor. The metallic scent, so long a phantom in Anya's mouth, became devastatingly real, filling the corridor. Stefan crumpled, his life gushing out onto the stones that seemed to drink it greedily. For a single, frozen moment, there was no sound but the gurgle of Stefan's last breath. Then Commander Volkov was there, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He and two others wrestled to sobbing, broken Fyodor to the ground. Volkov's eyes swept the scene. The dead guard, the blood-slicked floor, the silent, stoic Ivan, and the terrified faces of his men. His gaze then turned toward the corridor leading to Yaga's cell, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. He saw not a tragic accident born of fear, but a deliberate, calculated act of sabotage. A final, malicious trick from the witch. "This is her work," Volkov roared, his voice echoing with a fury that barely concealed his own terror. Her poison has infected our minds and turned brother against brother. This ends at dawn. The order was barked, swift and brutal. Lock down this wing. No one enters or leaves. Double the guard on the witch's cell. And someone get this filth. He kicked at the prostrate Fyodor. Into the blackest hole we have. As the stunned guard scrambled to obey, Anya stood frozen, watching Stefan's blood pool and seep into the cracks between the stones. The dungeon, she realized with a sickening certainty, was not just being infected. It was being consecrated, not with holy water, but with the blood of the innocent, spilled in fear. It was a sacrifice the ancient, hungry stones understood all too well. The path of nothingness that Yaga had spoken of, the unmaking, was no longer an abstract concept. It had begun, and the first drop of blood had just been let. The lockdown was absolute. The dungeon wing became a tomb sealed from the inside, the air thick with the ghosts of Stefan's blood and Fyodor's madness. Only the execution detail and the highest-ranking guards were permitted to enter. Anya, by some twist of fate, or perhaps Volkov's grim assessment of her reliability, was among those chosen for the final watch. This time, she was not alone in the corridor with Yaga. Captain Dmitri and Commander Volkov himself stood with her, flanked by 4 other stone-faced guards, their torchlight throwing monstrous, shifting shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was a physical weight, a suffocating mixture of military discipline and primal dread. Yaga, however, seemed more present than ever. Her stillness was no longer that of resignation, but of a predator poised to strike. Her storm-gray eyes were open, reflecting the torch flames, making it seem as if a fire burned within the cell itself. "It is almost over, witch," Volkov stated, his voice cold and flat, devoid of the rage from before. It was the voice of a man stating an immutable fact. "Your corruption ends with the sunrise." Yaga's lips curved into a smile so slight it was barely there, yet it held the weight of centuries. It was not a smile of defiance, but of profound, unnerving pity. "You still believe this is about my death, Commander," she said, her voice clear and resonant, no longer a whisper in the mind, but a sound that vibrated in the bones of all who heard it. "You believe you are cutting down a tree. You do not see that you are standing on its roots." She shifted her gaze to Anya, ignoring the armed men between them. The choice was being presented not in a private whisper, but here, in the heart of the enemy's strength. "The power they fear was never mine to hoard," Yaga declared, her words meant for Anya, but spoken for all to hear. "It is the land's. I was merely its custodian, a steward. By caging me here, you have not contained a storm. You have brought the lightning rod into your own house." Her eyes locked with Anya's. "The transfer is inevitable. The power is leaving this old vessel. It seeks a new one. It can flow into a vessel that is open, that can sing its song. A vessel like you, child of the singing bones. Or," she paused, letting the silence stretch, the implication hanging in the air like a headsman's axe. "Or it will flood this stone prison with no one to channel it. It will seek the cracks, the fearful minds, the spilled blood. It will turn your comrades into puppets of their own nightmares. It will make the stones themselves scream. Your Tsar's palace will become a monument to his folly, a cage of eternal madness. You have felt the whispers, Anya Petrova. Imagine them as a scream." Captain Dmitri snarled, stepping forward. "Do not listen to her lies. Her tongue is as forked as a serpent's." But Volkov said nothing. He watched, his face a grim mask, as the truth of Yaga's words settled like a shroud. He had seen Fyodor's breakdown. He had felt the wrongness in the stones. This was no mere trick. Yaga's final words were a soft, devastating verdict, aimed not at Anya, but at the commander and the Tsar he served. "You sought to cage the forest, Vasily, but you only succeeded in planting its heart in your own chest. Now, you will reap what you have sown." She closed her eyes, the audience over. The gambit was laid bare. There was no escape for her, and she did not seek one. She had offered a path to salvation, not for herself, but for the power she served. The choice was no longer Anya's alone. It had become the dungeons, the palaces, the empires. Would they accept a new, untamed guardian, or would they be consumed by the void they had so foolishly unleashed? Dawn was moments away. The final act was about to begin. The silence after Yaga's proclamation was more deafening than any battle cry. Commander Volkov stood frozen, the strategic part of his mind warring with the superstitious dread Yaga had just weaponized. He saw the truth in her words not as a possibility, but as a tactical assessment. The fortress was compromised from within by an enemy he could not fight with steel. "Hold this position," he commanded Dmitri, his voice stripped of all emotion. "No one approaches the cell. I must speak with the Tsar." He turned and strode away, his footsteps echoing with a hollow finality. The chain of command had just snapped. This was the moment. The fragile window of chaos Yaga had orchestrated. As the heavy door thudded shut behind Volkov, a new sound emerged, a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. It was the sound of Kalen's completed ritual deep below, a circle of power now awake and pulsing through the palace's foundations. The floor trembled, a fine dust sifting from the ceiling. Captain Dmitri's eyes widened in panic. What sorcery is this? In that second of distraction, Anya moved. It was not a thought, but an instinct, a path chosen the moment Yaga had laid it bare. She didn't draw her weapon against her comrades. Instead, she slammed the pommel of her dagger into the sconce, holding the main torch, plunging the corridor into near darkness, save for the faint, sickly green light now seeping from floor grates. Shouts of confusion erupted. In the disorienting gloom, a frail but firm hand closed around Anya's wrist. "This way, listener," whispered the blind maid Ludmilla. Her milky eyes saw nothing, but her other senses painted a perfect map of the panic. "The stones show me the path. They are angry. They want to help." As Ludmilla pulled Anya into a hidden servant's passage, the other twisted, made their move. In the kitchens, Mishka the cook, his gentle face set in uncharacteristic determination, swung a massive cleaver, severing the ropes of the alarm bell. He then barricaded the main door to the guard barracks from the outside with a heavy supply cart, his strength magnified by a desperate, borrowed power. The rats, his eyes and ears, chittered in approval. Pavel, still shattered from his encounter with Yaga, saw the tremors and the green light not as a threat, but as a deserved judgment. He did nothing to stop the chaos, merely sinking to his knees in a deserted corridor, a broken man welcoming the end. Anya and Ludmilla moved like ghosts through the walls, the ancient stones groaning and shifting around them, creating openings where none existed and sealing passages behind them. The palace itself was aiding their flight. They emerged not at an exit, but at the entrance to the deepest oubliette. The air here vibrated with raw, untamed power. Below, in his pit, Kalen chanted in a forgotten tongue, his glowing eyes fixed on the ceiling, his work complete. He had plowed the field. Now the seed would be planted. The final door stood between them and Yaga's cell. Back in the main corridor, Dmitri and his men had relit a torch, their faces pale with terror. They saw Anya and the blind maid appear from the wall, as if born from shadow. "Traitor!" Dmitri roared, leveling his sword. But before he could take a step, the stones beneath his feet erupted, not with force, but with life. Pale, grasping roots, thick as a man's wrist, shot from the cracks, twining around the guard's legs and arms, holding them fast. They were not broken or crushed, merely imprisoned by the very foundation they stood upon. Anya looked at Ludmilla, who gave a slow, knowing nod. "The roots answer the heart," the old maid murmured. "They always have." Taking a deep breath, Anya turned the heavy iron ring and pushed open the door to Yaga's cell. The final stage of the old witch's gambit awaited. The cell was no longer a prison of stone and iron. It was a sanctuary of swirling energies. The single weed had burst into a cascade of night-blooming flowers, their petals black as void, their centers glowing with the same faint green light that pulsed from the floor. The air hummed, thick with the scent of ozone, wet earth, and blooming jasmine. Yaga stood in the center of it all, her chains lying open and molten at her feet as if touched by a sun's core. She was no longer a frail old woman, but a conduit of awesome, terrifying power. Her silver hair floated as if underwater, and her storm-gray eyes held the light of a galaxy. "They come, Anya Petrova." Yaga's voice was a chorus of rustling leaves and grinding stone. "The vessel is chosen. The void is denied." Behind Anya, the door burst open. Commander Volkov had returned, not with a countermanding order, but with the executioner himself, a hulking, hooded man bearing a massive, rune-etched axe. High Priest Sylvanus was at his side, chanting prayers that withered and died in the supercharged air. "Stand aside, traitor," Volkov bellowed, his face a mask of desperate fury. "It is too late, Commander," Yaga said, her tone one of finality. "You are not here to witness an execution. You are here to witness a coronation." She turned her full attention to Anya, and a wave of pure, ancient knowledge crashed into her. It was not painful, but overwhelming. The memory of every root seeking water, every stone shaped by time, every beat of a wild heart in the deep woods. It was the song her bones had hummed all along. "The steward's duty passes to you," Yaga intoned. "Do not wield the power. Listen to it. Guide it. Be the heart that beats for the forest, for the stone, for the balance." The executioner roared, heaving his axe high, the runes blazing with holy fire. He charged. Yaga did not flinch. She spread her arms wide, a gesture of ultimate surrender and ultimate victory. The axe fell, but it did not strike flesh. A foot from her neck, it met an invisible wall of force and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. In that same instant, Yaga's form dissolved, not into blood and bone, but into a torrent of pure, blinding light, the condensed spirit of the wild, the essence of the unbroken earth. It did not explode outwards to destroy. It turned, a river of stars and shadows, and poured into Anya. The world vanished in a scream of light and a symphony of sensations. Anya felt her feet take root in the stone, her senses expanding through the palace walls, tasting the fear of every soldier, hearing the whispered secrets of the rats, feeling the slow, patient anger of the foundation stones. The power did not erase her. It filled her, a perfect, terrifying fit. When the light faded, Yaga was gone. Only the night-blooming flowers remained, already beginning to wither. Anya stood alone in the center of the cell. Her eyes, when she opened them, were no longer her own. One held the stormy gray of a centuries-old sky, the other the fierce, vibrant green of new spring growth. Volkov and Sylvanus stared, paralyzed by a terror beyond comprehension. The legend had not died. It had looked upon them, and found them wanting. Anya, the new heart of the forest, the new witch of the wilds, smiled. It was a smile both young and ancient. And outside, from the splinters and shadows of the royal forest, a hut-on giant, scaly chicken legs took its first, stumbling step. Silence. It was the first thing Anya noticed. Not the absence of sound, but a shift in its quality. The frantic shouts of the guards, the trembling of the stones, the dying chant of the high priest, they were still there, but they were distant now, muffled beneath a new, vast awareness. She could hear the slow, patient heartbeat of the earth deep below the palace foundations. She could hear the whisper of sap rising in trees a mile away. She could hear the collective breath of the forest, waiting. Her gaze swept over Commander Volkov and High Priest Sylvanus. They were frozen, two statues of disbelief and terror. The rune-etched axe lay in glittering shards around them, a testament to a power their iron and faith could not comprehend. Anya took a step forward. It was not the hesitant step of a guardsman, but the deliberate, rooted step of something ancient. The stone floor seemed to solidify beneath her foot, granting her unwavering support. "You sought to cage a storm in a box, Commander," she said, and her voice was a harmony, Anya's own, layered with the grinding stone whisper of Yaga. "You only succeeded in teaching it the shape of your walls." She didn't raise a hand. She didn't utter a curse. She simply looked at the iron-banded door. With a groan of protesting metal, the hinges tore themselves from the stone, and the door slammed shut, sealing them in. A lattice of pale, tough roots, identical to the one that had sprouted in her cell, erupted from the cracks around the frame, weaving a net of living wood over the iron. The message was clear. This tomb was now theirs. She turned towards the solid back wall of the cell. The stones recognized their mistress. They shifted, grumbled, and parted like a curtain, revealing not more dungeon, but the cool, pre-dawn air of the forest clearing outside the palace walls. The transition was seamless, a tear in the fabric of the Tsar's reality. Ludmilla stood there, waiting, a serene smile on her wrinkled face. Mishka was beside her, a giant now standing with the quiet confidence of a mountain. In the trees behind him, the shadows coalesced into the familiar, unsettling shape of the hut, pacing restlessly on its chicken legs. It was whole again, reborn from memory and magic. Without a backward glance at the sealed dungeon, Anya stepped into the clearing. She breathed in, and the scent of pine needles and damp soil filled her lungs, the first true breath of her new life. In the days that followed, strange reports trickled into the capital. The Tsar, it was said, never left his chambers, which had grown cold as a tomb no matter how many fires were lit. The palace guards were plagued by waking nightmares, jumping at the sound of creaking wood and the scent of blooming jasmine in stone corridors. The foundation of the Kremlin itself had developed a network of fine, root-like cracks that no mason could explain or repair. The legend of Yaga was dead, but in the deep, untamed woods, a new story was being written. In a hut that walked, a young woman with ancient eyes learned to listen to the wind. A blind maid brewed tea that could show you your heart's desire, and a gentle giant held conversations with the bears and the wolves. They were a new family, a new heart for the wild. And sometimes, travelers would speak of seeing a figure standing at the edge of the trees, her hair touched with silver and green, watching the distant spires of the Tsar's palace. She was not a monster to be feared, but a force of nature to be respected. The balance had been restored, the old which was gone. Long live the witch. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.